Hi everyone and welcome back to the George Collection. I'm Rachel Rightside Blonde. Nothing is as it seems right now. And if you're anything like me, I have been questioning every role model I've ever looked up to in the past. Past presidents, Hollywood stars, and yes, even Mother Teresa. In the November 1997 issue of George magazine, John Kennedy Jr. wrote about Mother Teresa. He left a couple clues in that editor's letter. So I wanted to really take a look at Mother Teresa based on this George magazine from November 97. On the cover of this issue features Barbara Walters, and it says, "What makes Barbara Walters cry?" We have none other than Roseanne Barr, who's been very vocal in this movement as of late, and we have the mysterious Michael Jackson. Lots of conspiracies around him. So I thought this was a good issue to look at today because I've been questioning everybody, and this is a great place to start. Let's look at Mother Teresa. Before we get into the editor's letter, let's look at a brief history of Mother Teresa. She was born August 26, 1910, and she died September 5th, 1997. And she was an Albanian Indian Catholic nun, and she was the founder of the Missionaries of Charity. Most of us have general knowledge of what Mother Teresa did, which was basically helping the poor. And there were things that she did that I absolutely agree with, like singling out abortion as the greatest destroyer of peace today. Because if a mother can kill her own child, what is left for me to kill you and you kill me? There's nothing between. I think a lot of people would agree with that statement. This is how she got her fame. In the early 1970s, Mother Teresa was an international celebrity. She had been catapulted to fame by a 1969 BBC documentary, Something Beautiful for God. During filming, footage shot in poor lighting was thought unlikely to be usable by the crew. The crew had been using new, untested photographic film. In England, the footage was found to be extremely well lit, and they called it a miracle of divine light from Teresa. Other crew members said it was due to a new type of ultra-sensitive Kodak film.
Had just taken delivery at the BBC of some new film made by Kodak, which we hadn't had time to test before we left, so I said to Peter, well, let's have a go. So we shot it. And when we got back several weeks later, a month or two later, we're sitting in the Rushes Theatre at Ealing Studios, and eventually up came the shots of the House of the Dying. And it was surprising. You could see every detail. And I said, that's amazing, that's extraordinary. And I was going to go on to say, 3 cheers for Kodak. I didn't get a chance to say that though, because Malcolm, sitting in the front row, spun round and said, it's divine light. It's Mother Teresa. You'll find that it's divine light, old boy. And 3 or 4 days later, I found I was being phoned by journalists from London newspapers who were saying things like, we hear you've just come back from India with Malcolm Muggeridge, and you were the witness of a miracle.
During her lifetime, Mother Teresa was among the top 10 women in the annual Gallup's Most Admired Man and Woman poll 18 times, finishing first several times in the 1980s and 1990s. In 1999, she headed the Gallup's list of most widely admired people of the 20th century. In 1979, she won the Nobel Peace Prize for work undertaken in the struggle to overcome poverty and distress, which also constitutes a threat to peace. She refused the conventional ceremonial banquet for laureates, asking that its $192,000 cost be given to the poor in India, and saying that earthly rewards were important only if they helped her to help the world's needy. When Mother Teresa received the prize, she was asked, "What can we do to promote world peace?" And she answered, "Go home and love your family." I think a lot of people would agree with that statement as well. Can you imagine if we actually all went home and loved our families, how many children would grow up in stable homes and how many problems that could alleviate in our country? I think that's pretty good advice. But let's look into this a little more. In 1994, Christopher Hitchens wrote a book called Hell's Angels about Mother Teresa.
One whose kingdom is not of this earth, Mother Teresa has an easy way with thrones, dominions and powers. Why do the rulers of this sinful and selfish world find her so awfully congenial? Is it because she returns the compliment? In 1984, a ghastly chemical spill from the Union Carbide plant in the Indian town of Bhopal took 2,500 lives and poisoned thousands more. This was an act not of God, but of a negligent multinational corporation. Mother Teresa's advice to the angry victims?
Forgive. Forgive. What Mother Teresa has done is she has accepted implicitly the idea that there's nothing much you can do for the poor except take them off the streets and, look after them. You cannot change their attitudes. You cannot make them feel that they have an ability, they may even have the means to improve and change their lives. She's not bothered with that agenda. She's only bothered with the agenda of trying to rescue their souls and make them a bit better before they go on to the eternal life, which is a very understandable, but in fact a very old-fashioned Christian idea. It is not a question of saying, how can we tackle the real problems of poverty?
If it sometimes seems that the Saint of Calcutta is never actually in Calcutta at all, this may be because she operates more as the roving ambassador of a highly politicized papacy.
And in 2003, Hitchens wrote an essay called Mommy Dearest, and in it, it says, "As for the miracle that had to be attested, what can one say? Surely any respectable Catholic cringes with shame at the obviousness of the fakery." A Bengali woman named Monica Bezra claims that a beam of light emerged from a picture of Mother Teresa, which she happened to have in her home, and relieved her of a cancerous tumor. Her physician, Dr. Ranjan Mustafi, says that she didn't have a cancerous tumor in the first place, and that the tubercular cyst she did have was cured by a course of prescription medicine. Was he interviewed by the Vatican's investigators? No. Later in the essay, he writes this: "Mother Teresa was not a friend of the poor, she was a friend of poverty. She said that suffering was a gift from God. She spent her life opposing the only known cure for poverty, which is the empowerment of women and the emancipation of them from a livestock version of compulsory reproduction. And she was a friend to the worst of the rich, taking misappropriated money from the atrocious Duvalier family in Haiti, whose rule she praised in return, and from Charles Keating of the Lincoln Savings and Loan. Where did that money and all other donations go?"
While he was flying high, Mother Teresa flew right along with him. She got the use of his private plane. He got a personalized Mother Teresa crucifix, which he used to store up treasure on earth.
Let's get him out of here.
Why should the missionaries of charity have such a special vocation for work among the rich? And does Mother Teresa pick frauds because they need her help more than the honest billionaires? It's not a question that she's ever answered, but then, in the prevailing atmosphere of piety and adoration, it's not a question that she's ever been asked.
The primitive hospice in Calcutta was as run down when she died as it always had been. She preferred California clinics when she got sick herself, and her order always refused to publish any audit. But we have her own claim that she opened 500 convents in more than 100 countries, all bearing the name of her own order. Excuse me, but this is modesty and humility? The rich world has a poor conscience, and many people like to alleviate their own unease by sending money to a woman who seemed like an activist for the poorest of the poor. People do not like to admit that they have been gulled or conned, so a vested interest in the myth was permitted to arise, and a lazy media never bothered to ask any follow-up questions. Many volunteers who went to Calcutta came back abruptly disillusioned by the stern ideology. George Orwell's admonition in his essay on Gandhi, that saints should always be presumed guilty until proved innocent, was drowned in a Niagara of soft-hearted, soft-headed, and uninquiring propaganda.
They didn't have enough drips. The needles they used and reused over and over and over, and you would see some of the nuns rinsing needles under the cold water tap. And I asked one of them why she was doing it. And she said, well, to clean it. And I said, yes, but why are you not sterilizing it? Why are you not boiling water and sterilizing your needles? She says, there's no point. There's no time.
As far as what's happening now with Mother Teresa, just a few weeks ago, there was a YouTube video put out called The Cult of Mother Teresa, Wolf in Sheep's Clothing, and it's amassed 150,000 views in just 2 weeks, which is pretty crazy. And the general comments are pretty interesting as well.
So now you see a little bit how I say with the saintly image, people who do not know, like this is why I say now we are in an age, the information age, where I encourage you guys to do research for yourself. Don't take anybody's word for anything. Don't just go by your feelings. Oh, I like this person. I like Mother Teresa. She seems so humble. Remember, God said, do not judge anyone by their physical appearance. He knows the contents of the heart. I do feel that there are agents of chaos that goes into countries, create chaos, and they don't do good for a country. With Mother Teresa, now the people are waking up and they're seeing she didn't do nothing for us either. She came here, used our struggle, our poverty to raise money and send it back to the Vatican. Do you guys see what I'm saying? When all this money, we worshiped her, we revered her, we gave her all these medals. And let me tell you something about true humility. When Jesus came to earth, because she said she did it for Christ, for Jesus, for the church, all of her good works. He was crucified, died as a criminal for our sins. This woman died and had a funeral fit for a king.
Hitchens brought up a great point about who was donating to Mother Teresa and what they were involved in. I did look up the Duvalier family, and all I can say is, wow. Everyone needs to go look that up. With all of that being said, let's read what John Kennedy Jr. wrote about Mother Teresa in 1997. The letter starts like this. As I write this, it has seemed like a month of funerals, and the outpouring of raw feeling has the cynics squirming like salt bugs after a spring rain. Princess Diana, Mother Teresa, and even broken President Mobutu seem to reveal themselves as much in death as in life. A few contrarians are finding fault with Mother Teresa now that she's in a pine box. How better to display independent-mindedness than to slag a future saint? All the virtue that Mother Teresa displayed can't be as pure as it looks, some naysayers chortle. Whatever their reasons, I'm certain they would feel different if they ever had seen her hands, as I once did during a trip to Calcutta years ago. I was working on a rural development project in southern India and had long been waiting to visit the city that seemed the essence of India in all its exotic chaos. Mother's hands, with thick, arthritic knuckles, looked as if they were made of clumps of wood and were disproportionately large for her tiny body. The weathered brown of her skin stood in contrast to the cool white of the garments worn by the sisters of the order she founded. But her hands were restless like a young person's. I remember wondering how much suffering must have seeped into those fingers. Within minutes of our having met, she commandeered me to drive her to the airport where she was to receive a shipment of donated clothing from New Delhi. You see, she said, I ask everyone for help all the time. I ask, and just when they think they've done enough and are fed up with me, I ask for more. She grinned, adding, I have no shame. It was thrilling to help her. I mean, how many times have you jumped at the chance to drive someone to the airport through some of the worst traffic in the Northern Hemisphere? It felt like God's work. The letter goes on to praise Princess Diana and also Mother Teresa, and it's just really interesting, those two little tidbits about her fingers and asking and having no shame. So I just wanted to share those. There's also a really cool ad next to this editor's letter, and I've showed this before, but I want to show it again. It's a couple watches, and it says, it's about time. Is it about time? I hope it's about time. It needs to be about time. That does it for this episode of the George Collection. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time.
Of this extraordinary magazine, George, which is a hoot of a magazine. I thought you were a lawyer.
I was.
What happened?
Well, we decided, I mean, actually taking a cue from folks like yourself and you around the 1992 election that there was an opportunity here to change the definition of a political magazine. Certainly the way Americans were accessing information about politics and politicians was changing. Candidates were appearing on late night talk shows, on talk radio, on sitcoms, and there was a kind of a leveling process, and while the rest of media clearly had caught up with that, we felt that political magazines per se hadn't.
Your mother was a hell of an editor at Doubleday.
That's what I hear.
Would she have liked George?
I think she would have.